Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the season premiere of Civil Conversations with Matt Aguito. I am super excited to have this episode as the kickoff episode for Civil Conversations Season 2. One of the things about this that I'm um, kind of like interested in is really bringing together different voices and different perspectives for the purposes of trying to add some level of either clarity or understanding around the nuance around the Black Lives Matter movement, organization, initiative. Part of the concerns that I think a lot of people have are pretty valid. And I think all of those concerns range according to the perspectives that we all live in, may it be our personal lives, may it be the way it's impacted other people personally, and how it's just being portrayed by media, whatever that media is, right? Mainstream media, if it's the social media, if it's heck, just you telling a friend like you need to go do this or you need to not do this, and now how it's incorporated into corporate America, I think is also pretty critical as well. So I invited three people to sit down and talk with me from three different perspectives, and I'm going to probably pick on Rob first, which just because, and then I'll go Jasmine and Lisa to introduce himself before we kick this real conversation off. So, Rob, if you don't mind spending a couple of minutes introducing yourself to the audience.
Yeah, sure thing, Matt. Hey, thanks for having me on tonight. It's awesome to be here. And so just a quick intro for myself. Again, my name is Rob Doggett. I'm the owner and instructor of the JKD Process. JKD Process is an online training platform for Jeet Kune Do, the martial art founded by Bruce Lee. And sort of my, the perspective I'm coming from is that, frankly, of a lifelong martial artist. And so a lot of folks don't really know sort of how the philosophy of martial arts really can be applied to what we're talking about tonight, our subject. So I intend to sort of bring at least a little bit of that perspective. So that's kind of the framework for that which I'm coming from. So it's great to be here.
Awesome, man. Hey, thanks, bro. I really appreciate that. And Miss Jasmine or Miss.
I love, I really love how this is flowing like water. So my name is Jasmine, and I own a for-profit business called the Inspire Agency, and we provide anti-oppression education experiences, as well as leadership experiences for people to learn and grow. And then I own a nonprofit called Amplify and Activate, which was designed to decolonize yoga and practice social justice, use the tools from yoga to practice self-care and social justice.
Awesome. Thank you, Jasmine. And Lisa.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I really appreciate being a part of this conversation. Thanks for letting me be here. I'm Lisa Robinson. I currently work and go to school at UC Berkeley, supporting students. I'm also earning a master's in global studies, where I'm currently focused on East Africa issues around decolonization and things like that. Yeah, I'm just really excited to be here and to meet these other panelists. And yeah, let's do this.
All right, awesome. So thank you all. So I'm going to just start off by just blowing it wide open in regards to Black Lives Matter. So giving a little bit of what I would consider to be regular history, right? So those who are more aware of the history of Black Lives Matter, correct me or whatever if you feel like you need to. So post the Trayvon Martin trial of George Zimmerman, the Black Lives Matter movement started to really take on. It's really actually where a lot of people say that's where it started. And the hashtag started moving along. That was probably around 7 years ago. From then on, there's been several cases that have occurred or incidents that have occurred with Black Americans in the US, specifically by the hands of either cops or what some would say vigilantes. And that has caused Black Lives Matter, this statement, and I'm compartmentalizing different things, to continue to grow as it's done over the last 7 years. Part of one of the current concerns around Black Lives Matter or the current confusion around Black Lives Matter, and I actually have this confusion, and I know that there are others who are watching this have this confusion, is what really is Black Lives Matter? So as we had the hashtag, we know that the organization itself started to also sprout up. And before the organization sprouted up, there were some responses to Black Lives Matter in regards to saying all lives matter, white lives matter, blue lives matter. So it was almost a like a placation on the statement, and then basically flipping it to be something else, because some people felt like saying Black Lives Matter is almost like saying no other lives matter. When you read words and not necessarily hear diction or communication, it really is something like, you know what? I'm really tired and frustrated with all that's going on with Black Americans. And I just want you guys to know, you know what, man, like Black Lives Matter too. That context, the way I just said it, is what I believe has been the initial point of the statement Black Lives Matter. And so as of today, however, and then I'll shut up and let anybody else respond. There's been almost now a backlash to Black Lives Matter because of the organization, not necessarily because of what the words mean. At least that is what's stated by those who oppose the Black Lives Matter movement. And then now, due to different riots and damages that have been caused in different cities around the nation, around the world, BLM is being thrown out there as being responsible along the sides of Antifa, or Antifa, I don't know, I'll just say Antifa, as a problem. And that's part of where we are today. And there's a lot of confusion around this, and I want to talk about it. So, you know, what do you guys think? Anybody can speak up. What do you guys think about the way I just summarized the current aspect of Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, Matt, I think that was a great summary, and you really addressed a lot of the confusion a lot of folks have. I think there's a couple issues at play. One, you're always going to have folks that sort of disagree, right? That's always going to be the case. So regardless of what you do, you're going to have those individuals. I think sometimes where we hurt ourselves, you know, those folks that care about Black lives, I think where we hurt ourselves is that when you don't have clearly defined goals, right, or actions that you want to see happen, right? I mean, that's great that statues have been removed and different companies have taken, you know, changed certain policies and things like that. But, you know, without a definitive action we want, like, for example, civil rights, right? We had the Civil Rights Act passed, right? That was something that we wanted, right? You know, I mean, you hear terms like defund police, you know, you hear things like police reform, criminal justice reform, but I don't think those things are really clearly defined. And so I think that's part of the issue, you know, from my perspective.
No, I appreciate that, bro. I really do. Lisa and Jasmine, thoughts?
Yeah, I like your point, Rob, about how the lack of clearly defined goals can lead to ambiguousness.
Yep. Ambiguity. You got it.
Sorry, a little nervous today.
No, you're good.
But I think, yeah, and I think, you know, some of the criticisms that people seem to have about the movement come from a place of not knowing like that hierarchical structure or the organization part. So it seems to me that the people that are critical of like certain components of it that are like, oh, but this is Marxist, or oh, but this is blah, blah, blah. But it actually doesn't have to do with the movement itself. They're talking about these ancillary aspects of it that aren't actually relevant to the core of it. So I think you're absolutely onto something when you talk about the lack of kind of clarity around that area. Jasmine, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm just listening to the language that you're both describing, and I can understand what you're talking about in that aspect, but I come from a social science perspective, and I study how whiteness works, and the culture of whiteness works to neutralize anything that doesn't center whiteness. And so when you have words or phrases like all lives matter, it works to deflect away from what Black Lives Matter is standing for and neutralize it to bring it back to whiteness matters. So that's one point. And then when we talk about riots, I know we'll get there soon, but it's interesting to me how riots is codified as a way of criminalizing the activities that are happening during these uprisings in an effort to neutralize and to take away from the fact that a revolution is needed. How else did the American Revolution occur, right? So the Boston Tea Party, was that not a riot? When we look at sports events, are those not riots when people are flipping cars and burning things? Like, it's just interesting the language that is used for certain people. In particular, we're talking about Black people in this case, always to either neutralize and deflect or to criminalize and harm.
So do you feel like, and anybody can respond, but this is to you, Jasmine, like I appreciate what you just said, the way you said it. It is, even in my description, I was intentional. I wanted to see how anyone was going to catch on when I said riot, because I think that is the magnified perspective of the Black Lives Matter movement, due to the negativity that is just polarizing when you look at it on the screen. So, for example, if you just showed a bunch of quiet, peaceful people walking in the street saying Black Lives Matter, outside of the initial big boost that we just had post the death and killing of George Floyd, it really wasn't making good TV. But the riots or the damages are, right? So you can, I saw one thing on, I have a close friend, him and I talk a lot about mainstream media, and there was a guy who posted a video from another angle of what another one of the three-letter networks had shown, and literally you see them breaking windows, and then the block over, it's just people quiet walking down the streets, and it was amazing. But it was his cell phone, and it was just like, he was just chilling. They were chilling, but then the street that they shot was over here, right? So you're right, Jasmine. I think that's, that is highlighted a lot. But then at the flip side, going back to your point in regards to the way change happens, that we do have a history in the United States of America that has a level of revolt to it. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, because of the way that the country is designed under the premise of whiteness and white culture, it tends to be very violent, right? We have a lots of need for when we require need for change. The impetus is violence, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, if we look at Reconstruction, their answer to Black men being placed into positions of power was to create the KKK, a violent domestic terrorist organization. Was the answer to revolt against and revolutionize us back into the place where whiteness had all power or held power. So everything usually has to recalibrate to whiteness being in power.
Got you. Rob, you almost look like you were going to say something. So.
No, I actually agree with sort of, some of the comments that Jasmine made there. So, I mean, you're right. So there's two things at play, right? There is, that side of, yes, you're always going to have folks who are going to sort of downplay the message, right? In terms of, hey, something needs to change in the country. Like, we're not perfect, right? We're not a perfect country, not a perfect nation, I think, though, we need to really make sure, though, that as we're, whether protests or riots, that there's a definitive goal. And that's just so important. And I think, you just have to have that, right? So you just have to have a goal. I mean, just protest. I compare it to going to school, right? You go to school every day and there's a bully, right? The bully's bigger than you. He's stronger than you. Every day you go to school, you get punched in the face, right? Now, some days you go to school and you ask the bully, hey, don't punch me in the face. Don't punch me in the face. And maybe that day he feels nice, right? And he's not going to punch you in the face. But the next day he changes his mind, you get punched in the face. So until you have the power to fight back against that bully, you're subject to how that bully feels, right? And so, as African Americans, in America, we have to have, that power, essentially. I mean, we can't just be relying on being treated equally. You have to have the power to demand equality, right? I mean, just protesting and that's, you need to have the power to effect change. And right now we don't. So I know we're protesting because what other power do we have? But, you know, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, or if you know historical examples, but typically, you know, change happens in countries and nations as a result of, you know, either money or some type of war, right? Some type of violence, right? And I'm not, you know, advocating anything. I'm just saying that that's historically how change has happened. And so, you know, those are the kind of things we have to sort of think about as we, you know, think about affecting change.
Yeah. And I did want to mention this other point real quick was what, you know, media is designed to sensationalize, right? So it's going to also support the dominant narrative. And what a lot of conversation that doesn't come about is who was actually creating the damage, right? So if you were paying attention, there were cops that were creating damage. There were white people creating damage. But the prevailing thought and narrative that it was just these violent protester Black people, right, doing this damage and looting. That was also the case, and there were some intentionality to create the violence, to spark it, that did not come from the protesters.
So Jasmine, I got a question for you, and this can, and Lisa, you can, you know, answer too. I don't want to steal Matt's thunder, but, you know, from your perspective, what are the goals? What is the goal of Black Lives Matter? Like, whether you're thinking about the organization or you're thinking about the movement, what is our, in other words, when will Black Lives Matter in America? Like, what does that look like?
Can Lisa answer that one first? I'm curious to see what she says.
Yeah, I just want to take some points from both of you. First of all, to have a clear goal, but also it sounds to me, Jasmine, and I might be misunderstanding you, so please correct me, that a goal might be to disrupt the narrative so that the white narrative isn't the dominant narrative. But to do that, it requires so much systemic change that as for those of you that aren't watching at home, I'm a white cisgendered privileged person, so part of the challenges that I've had is where do I fit in this landscape of trying to affect change in that way? And so to answer your question, Rob, but not really, I invite you both to criticize me here if I'm wrong, but if the goal of Black Lives Matter might be to change the paradigm completely so that it's no longer defined by or neutralized by whiteness, then how do we effectively do that? Is that the goal, I guess, is my first question.
And what does that look like? You know, that's, in my mind, it's, you know, that's, I don't know what that looks like. So you know?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage us to, Matt, can I share my screen right quick?
Yeah, if you can.
Okay, if you don't mind. Maybe I can, maybe I can't here. I'd like to just pull up. So what does this?
And what you highlighting?
Harry? So this is out of the mouths. I always love to go to source, especially if we're having a civil conversation and, you know, one based in reality, that the grounding is to come to the source and ask, what is Black Lives Matter? So here are the tenets, if you can see, those who are watching, right? That we are expansive, we're collective, liberators who believe in inclusive and spacious movement. So the language is being used and some of their tenets and ways of being, it's not a linear, smart goal that we're talking about here. We are affirming the lives of Black, queer, trans, and disabled and undocumented folk with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. We are working for a world where Black lives no longer systemically are target for demise. We are affirming humanity. So these tenets and these intentions for us to move to a society in which we prioritize our own humanity and the humanity of others, it's not a linear, okay, so step one is this, step two is this, step three. That's not how this is going to work. That's not how liberation works.
So let me ask this then. Let me ask this. Thank you for sharing that. When it comes to what you just said, so what you just said is not incorrect at all. I mean, I get it. They have that on their site, and that's clearly what they're doing. the part that's really difficult, and I'm speaking for myself plainly, the part that's really difficult, has been difficult at some points, have been the statement Black Lives Matter is not problematic, right? And I'm also going to take the position of people who are not on this call, because I think that's fair, and they're probably going to be listening in. But it's more of the fact that there's belief systems that exist, may it be religious or not, that makes it difficult for the agreement with the organization itself, right? So, like even Lisa brought up earlier around the Marxist connection, and that's being used a lot right now as reasons why. And I'm not saying it's valid and invalid. That's not the point of what I'm speaking of. It's more of, you're right. That's what the Black Lives Matter organization has out there, but as people are taking on the responsibility of being able to walk out Black Lives Matter, and then they look at the organization, they're saying to themselves, I don't want to walk out Black Lives Matter if it represents this that I'm reading on this website. That's just a fact. If people like it or not, and I get it, even including the founders of Black Lives Matter, I'm sure they're having issues with it, and people are defending it. But the fact of the matter is, there are people that exist that won't or don't want to align themselves with that. I mean, you know what I'm saying, guys? Like,
yeah, they never would, right? So I don't think that it's the point for Black Lives Matter or anyone who is seeking liberation to try and convince someone of what they don't believe. Liberation comes in any one person's own lived experience and of their choosing. I'm not here to help convince people that my Black Lives Matter. I'm here to roll with those who already know that my Black Lives Matter, or that they're investigating for themselves and wanting to understand more.
right.
I'm not particularly for maybe people who are on the one-on-one still inquiring and in that state of resistance. I'm not here to argue. That's not where my energy, and that's not my ministry. I'm the one who is rolling with people who have done their work, who are in their labor, their individual labor for their own liberation, and want to join organizations that are of that movement. And I understand that everybody is in their own space and place.
That makes sense. No, I think that's good. Lisa, you look like you're about to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm right there with you. And I'm very sensitive to the burden that can be placed on people of color in this space. So when I hear things like that, I think, okay, well then it's as someone who has privilege, it's really my goal or my task to try and see how I can make sure that people aren't distracted by the fallacies of a movement, but rather understand the core of it, and then can understand why people are protesting and rioting. So I view it as, again, white, cisgendered, privileged person, that it's actually my responsibility to do that work, because people that are victimized by the system of oppression don't have the bandwidth to do that. Would you agree with that, Jasmine?
Absolutely. I do. One of my organization's tenets, Amplify and Activate, we actively say that whenever we're in mixed company, and this would be mixed company, right, when you're in different ethnicities, that there are two works that happen in the room. And because the United States, we're still in a black-white paradigm, we're still othering and invisibilizing cultures that are not either of the black or white race, that there are two works in the room, and it's the work of white people to unlearn white supremacy and racism. That's not our legacy. That's not our work. It's not what we benefit from. And it's the work of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to unlearn the internalized oppression, which is a byproduct of white supremacy. And it's also for us to practice radical, revolutionary self-care as we go through the systems and seek our liberation. So yes, you're right, Lisa. That is your work. That is your labor.
So Matt, I just got a few comments on that for everyone. Yeah, I don't want to be the bad guy in the room here, but
No, you're not a bad guy for just speaking your perspective, because it's important, because you represent people. You represent yourself, but you may represent people who are listening as much as it may be hard to hear. So go ahead, man.
So first of all, the question was never answered as far as what does that look like when Black Lives Matter. And I get it, Jasmine, that it's not a SMART goal where it's you have your it's measurable and realistic and all that kind of thing. But if we don't know what that looks like, how will we know when we get there? How will we know when MLK's dreams been realized if we can't define it, if we have no idea what that looks like? So for example, for me, when I think about Black Lives Matter, right, and I think about what does that look like in America, I think about things like community policing, right? I think about things where, you know, we're more engaged and policing ourselves more. I also think about a change, like you talked about, Jasmine, a change in what I would honestly say is the culture. So in terms of the, you know, this has been sort of one of my life's work is Black culture, because our culture really right now is not ours. Okay, and that's a separate subject, but redefining that mentality of oppression that you talked about. So that's one thing. Okay, so our culture is going to look different. How we talk to each other is going to look different. Our music's going to be different, right? We're not going to have this music that's talking about us killing each other, right? That's going to look different. It's also going to be different in terms of our community violence. That's going to look different. Okay, the rates will be down, right? So to me, that's measurable things that I can say, hey, now it matters, you know, in America. The other thing would be something like reparations, right? So these kind of things to me are concrete things I can say, hey, this is what we're working towards, as opposed to, you know, give me something. I mean, I'm not a protest kind of guy. I like, we have to speak the power with power.
Can I?
Toolkits, I'm sorry, there are toolkits on the Black Lives Matter website that talk about healing and restorative justice and community autonomy and sustainability and community policing. So yes, all of those are true. But I would like to ask, how do you start a business? Where does your vision for starting a business start? Like, how do you get that vision and how does it form? And then what resources do you pull in to create that business, right? Like, so that's where we're at. We have to realize that our community and our country, and one of my teachers, Nikki Myers of Yoga for 12-Step Recovery, shares with us that America is in a spiritual crisis, right? So when MLK was murdered, Malcolm X was murdered, Medgar Evers were all murdered in succession, JFK was murdered, our country experienced a societal trauma.
And Robert Kennedy, that was like the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah, right. And so our society experienced a societal trauma, and we've yet to recover from that. Like, a lot of things stopped. A lot of the movement stopped. And it gave opportunity for us to revert back to systems of harm, right? So then we started the war on drugs, the war on Black people, criminalizing Black people, and further harming Black families, which is a whole nother conversation. But we're picking up the blueprint that was laid out from our teachers in the 60s and revolutionizing those, or reviving those concepts and learning very new those concepts to many of us in order to pick up where we left off.
Yeah, so, but I mean, I don't know if what worked in the 60s
like this sense of urgency. When we talk about a timeline or a sense of urgency, we cannot have that. We can't have this sense of urgency. It has to happen right now, because cultural change like that, you can't turn the Titanic around in just one swoop. It takes years. It takes,
I think,
a long time.
I'm with you on that.
Moving towards something individually and collectively and come together for those changes to happen. Now, quick change is going to be a revolution, right?
Right.
Like, about civil war, like that's going to be a quick change.
So Jasmine, let me cut in here with something real quick. And before I look, Lisa, you look like you're itching to say something too. So just give me a second. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with what's being said on either side. I think this is hard to, I think, hear for those that have a passion in a specific area of success in the middle of what I would say to be a change, right? Everybody has their role in regards to the overall big picture of whatever Black Lives Matter is supposed to be. I don't know if it's healthy in some cases to say that one person's position, well, if it's causing like true negativity and like harm, okay, we got to have that conversation. What I'm saying is, like, everybody has a different role in making sure that, quote unquote, Black Lives Matter, the statement, Black Lives Matter. But I'm going to probably go about that in a different way than Lisa's going to go about that, and Rob's going to go about that, and Jasmine is going to go about that, and then of course the different people that are listening to the show, to this conversation. But what Rob's touching on, I think, is important for those that are looking for actionable steps, because one of the things I will say for people who are non-Black, I would say majority of the people that are non-Black, not saying that non-Black people are not out there protesting, because they definitely are protesting and standing out there. They don't have the lifestyle or the history they don't come from a position of like, I've lived this. They're now just saying, I need something to tell me what I need to do so I can actually get something done. That's on the non-Black side. Now, within the Black side, the other aspect of that is the lack of what I would consider to be education is a strong word, but I'm going to use it just for right now because I can't think of anything else. In regards to what can I do? I am just a typical like Black dude or Black lady in the hood, and I just want to see my Black life get better where I am right now. Y'all feel where I'm going with this? And Lisa, you can chime in whenever you can. Go on.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. You know, I can't speak for all white people. I'm not going to even try because that would be crazy. But for me in my own personal journey in this space, one of the first and fundamental aspects of being able to understand anything relating to Black Lives Matter was just understanding that my lived experience is completely different than a Black person's in this country. And that took a long time for me to get to that place. And it took a long time and some, huge self-reflection to get there and to understand that this whole system is structurally racist, or there's elements of it around there. And I've seen that kind of growth and other folks kind of from my demographic on this journey in different ways. And so, Matt, your point of, how, Jasmine, your point that it's not a linear process is absolutely valid. And both Matt and Rob are talking about, okay, but what can we do to kind of move the needle forward with that in small ways? And to Matt's point, it might look different from my perspective than it does from yours, but really trying to understand those small goals to start to move the needle and start to help with changing the culture is going to be really valid and vital for people like me who really do want to change but aren't exactly sure how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head, Matt, when you said education. Right? Start with education, because we were taught this system. We were taught that Christopher Columbus was a hero, right? Like, we were taught certain things to acculturate towards whiteness. So it is our job to learn the truth behind the propaganda. And so it's education. And also that the system is not broken, but the system is designed this way.
And also, I mean, I went through so many years of education before I learned about Black Wall Street, before I learned about Tulsa. I didn't know about that. And that's horrible. That's a huge failure of our system. Yeah. And it's you're absolutely right. It has to change.
And I think,
okay.
Jasmine, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm going to speak from my Black household. We had the Encyclopedia of Ebony Jet, right? It gave us a whole nother history that was not taught. So we have to supplement our education, and we have to continue to supplement that education that unfortunately white people don't get. They don't understand. Because really there's no need for them to know, right? Because the system is designed for them to succeed in that way and be able to live freely without consequence of knowing that history. But unfortunately, that's what makes them racist.
So let me ask this. Thanks for your comment, Jasmine. I don't want to be tried. I didn't want to think I was. So let me ask this then. So like when we're talking about education, right? There's a level of education, and ironically, here's a question that popped up. I just what would be, this is a comment, what would be acceptable education? Okay, I think that comment is very important. Thanks, Dad, by the way, for those who probably recognize this same last name. I think the part that's important about that question or statement is that education is, how do I say this? education can be heavily perspective driven. Okay, so for example, when you talked about Christopher Columbus and you talk about history, for those who are able to write it down at any point in time in the last 400 years of the US or a few thousand years of the world, that's the history that was taught to everyone based on what was written down, right? That's just how history works, right? Literally, that's it. It's through writings and stories. And we all know we played the game telephone. So ain't no way in the world that if it wasn't written down, that we definitely know what's being said is right. So what does that education really look like, right? Because I can go to a Rob. Let's take Rob and I, for example. Rob and I can talk about something and I'll bring a religion in just for the purposes of this conversation. I do not want to talk about religion in depth. But him and I are believers from a Christian standpoint. Our educational process is going to be different than others who are not. Not because we think we're better than anyone or whatever. It's just we have an area that we can connect on and boom, we start educating. White people, same thing. Asians, y'all just understand what I'm saying? Like, what does education look like? And I know, Jasmine, I want to give this to you, and then Rob, if you two can kind of comment on this one, because Jasmine, I know what you do, and Rob, you all are in education, but specifically want to start with you two. Go ahead, Jasmine.
I was going to let Rob go. I felt like I've been taking up a lot of air.
Rob, go ahead, Rob.
I was gonna say ladies first, but I'll go ahead and take it.
Ladies first model too, but go ahead, man.
My pronouns are she and they, so I'm kind of non-conforming.
All right, I'll go ahead and take that invitation. But to be honest with you, I would say education does need to be, for African Americans, it does need to be somewhat Afrocentric. That's my position. So what I mean by that is that right now, when we learn about Black history, right, we learn about Black history in the month of February, a very short month, right? We understand that. But when I grew up, the only thing I learned about Black history was that we were slaves and that we fought for freedom and that we marched and protested and went through civil rights. But you know, I mean, what kind of history is that, right? You learn your entire life that you were an oppressed people. You've always been an oppressed people. I mean, how does that set you up for the future, right? So I think we need to understand that Black history doesn't start when we got to America, right? Whenever that is, right? I know, you know, there were Black people in America before the transatlantic slave trade, but you know, Black people have been around. Life started in Africa. So if we're going to talk about Black history, we need to talk about Black history before America. And we don't learn about that. And that's huge, right? And we don't learn about our languages. We don't learn about our culture, you know, and that's important in terms of self-identity. We as a people don't know who we are. I'm just going to flat out say that. We don't know who we are because our culture, what was our culture, was taken from us. Right. So now what we have is our food is diabetes causing, it's junk. Our language, the way we talk to each other, our music, the way we talk about each other, our women. Right. So there's all these things within the popularized Black culture that really is part of our education. If we're going to talk about education, we need to talk about culture. So that's sort of my position, Matt. I'll defer to Jasmine and get her thoughts as well.
Can I comment on that before Jasmine speaks? I think everything you said was valid. No questions asked. I believe that when you have an understanding of who you are and where you're from, that does change things. I'll spend 30 seconds on myself real quick. I may have shared this with one of you all, but I'm first generation American, born in Brooklyn. And when I was 11 or 12 years old, I was taken by my mom with my uncle to walk the streets of where my parents are from in Nigeria, specifically a town called Agbo in Delta State, Nigeria. I could tell you exactly where my dad was born, the area, and where my mom was born, the area, right? I am, to most people, when you see me walking down the street, just a Black man. What I found is interesting, and I've done this little personal experiment, I'll add on another 30 seconds, is I've spoken to people who are not Black, and I would say, hey man, do you happen to know where you're from? And 99% of the time they say, you know, I'm part Irish, I'm part German, I'm part this, I'm part this, I'm part that, I'm part this, I'm part that. I mean, Lisa, it wouldn't surprise me if I said, where are you from? You probably say, oh, I'm part this, part that. If I go to a Black person, my own wife, I know there's some people in the Caribbean is what she'll say, and then just kind of about it. Identification is a big deal when it comes to getting educated. That's one aspect of education, but I just wanted to kind of give that perspective to everybody. I am thankful. That was not said in pride. I'm thankful for the position that God has allowed me to be in as a person here. But I also know that my fellow Blacks or African Americans don't have that, and we need that. Like, we need that badly. But go ahead, Jasmine. What are you gonna say?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about what you're saying, and many of us are lucky if we can get to 7 generations back, right? Like that's incredible to go that back that far. But I'll digress and say that when we were talking about education, you're mentioning, Rob, about like it being a cultural education or cultural shift that's needed, and I agree. We also have to be really careful about not identifying us as a monolith, and that it's not like how we're all talking to. Because I like my crew is a little different, right? So it depends on like where you're positioning yourself intentionally and what it is that you're striving for in your life. But I use embodiment techniques to call up some of that what we're learning about epigenetic DNA, and that there are messages and there is information in our bodies that's kept in our bodies that we need to tap into. A great author of this work is Resmaa Menakem in My Grandmother's Hands. He talks a lot about somatics and somatic experiences, and how the body can be used to understand history, that we carry that experience of our ancestors in our bodies. And so the path towards liberation begins, and I'm sure Rob would understand this when I say that the path towards liberation begins within the body. And us getting to know our feelings and our sensations, to name those things, to own those things, to acknowledge, and then to take care and treat our bodies well. And that's where the pure education begins within. Because if we're not taking care of ourselves and we are subjecting ourselves to oppression, then of course we're going to replicate that.
Right.
And it creates the ripple effect. But once we understand individually how to liberate ourselves from systems of oppression, how to speak out, how to earn the confidence, how to have the requisite education to apply the knowledge. And it's not perfect. No one's perfect. But the effort to try gives people permission to do the same for themselves. Imagine being in a meeting and you just say, get up and go to the restroom. You don't even say anything. You just get up and go. People are like, what's happening? What's going on? You're breaking the norm. I'm taking care of myself. You have permission to do the same. Imagine someone being so bold as, can we take a break? I need to use the restroom. It gives permission for others to stop chain of what was normal, and especially now. Like now is a prime opportunity, and create what are new norms. And new norms should be centralized and each individual taking care of themselves and liberating themselves from system of oppression.
So thank you for going to that. I think that's great. What you shared, and that to me, especially those last like maybe 6 or 7 minutes, we definitely focused on what I would consider to be the and if I can summarize this, the Black African American ways of trying to get that level of education about who we are. If I can pivot a little bit on education when it comes to 2 other things, resources. I want to pivot this to Lisa, non-Black education, because right now you have, I don't understand why Black Lives Matter exists. My buddy is Black and I love him, so he matters. So I don't understand why we even doing this. I want to be part of the movement, but a lot of this is now getting into corporate America, right? And it's been heavy in corporate America, especially since George Floyd passed. And so for our non-Black people trying to get educated, what does that look like? And Lisa, I'm just curious about your perspective on that. If you have a clue, or you're just still searching yourself, and you want to know, what does that look like for you in your circles?
Yeah, I think the challenge here is that it's very individual, and that's the problem, right? Like it's not a widespread educational platform that introduces us to a lot of these concepts. So it's a structural change that needs to happen so that we are more aware of those things. And I just want to put a side note in. I'm adopted, so like the idea of identity is something that has been prevalent in all my life. And there's really cool research about African Americans going to Ghana to try and do heritage, trying to like go into their past, and that they felt some of them felt like they were neither Ghanaian nor American, and so trying to find their identity within that. So just want to throw that out there. That's kind of cool research out there. But pivoting back to education, I think that the challenge again is because it's so individual. It means that there's no consistency. So my individual journey is going to look a lot different than someone right next to me who might or might not have the same cultural values. Additionally, I think to your question is talking a little bit about like economic change. And for me, Black Lives Matter isn't explicitly about that, but it's all about that, right? Like there's so much gap. There's this huge income inequality that's happening for people of color, not earning enough and doing all these things. And so this is where I think that people get distracted by, rumors of Marxism and things like that, because the movement itself isn't calling for a huge overhaul of capitalism, but it is calling for a recognition of how structurally unequal things are in this country. So education in terms of like my perspective, non-Black perspective, is just trying to understand all of these different pieces of structural racism and how they connect. And the more I learn, the more I see. But the more I learn, the more overwhelmed I am in how to actually affect change with that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of those are my initial.
It kind of does. I mean, like for me, it goes back to relationship as well. And like I like what you said about individual, at the beginning of it. And you're right. It's a tough situation when it comes to that form of education. I will say that like there is an experience. Some of the best experiences I think we've all had have been with relationships that we have, right? When I'm saying some of my best educational experiences, not the bad experiences, we've all had rough friendships or relationships. But like if we're in relationship with somebody of another race and they actually get to know you, being able to utilize those relationships to speak up about some of the things that are going on in our lives is a form of education. And I think that's important, yeah. And so I think the part that's important for us to realize is that when you have those who are, let's just use the protest aspect and protest, and I'll add on trailing any form of rioting. That is the aggressive change, right? And I know that you had shown in I don't know if you showed this, but you don't have to. But on the Black Lives Matter site, they even have like these kits for like things to help people kind of mobilize and so on. So that's cool. But the movement that's happening in corporate America right now, again, I have to speak for those who are not on here, not because I feel like I 100% agree or disagree, but it's important. There's a level of forcedness that's occurring that has made people who are non-Black, or even some that are Black, uncomfortable. Now, I know that uncomfortability is part of change, so I'm not actually arguing with that. But you've now tied their paychecks to this thing, right? Where you have diversity and inclusion and equity training. You have, racial awareness training, white fragility talks and so on and so forth. I'm not here to start calling people fragile white folks or that stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. It's just that it's now tied to our paychecks. When I go to work every day, I now have to do my job and to listen to this Black stuff. Like, and I think that's hard for some people. So go ahead, and Rob or Rob look like, well, first off, Jasmine looks ready. But I do
want to say something real quick because it relates to what Rob said earlier about education. When he was saying that for Black education, it needs to be Afrocentric, I would say that for everybody in America, it needs to be Afrocentric. Like that's where it needs to start. Like if we know that the existence of man, woman, personhood began in Africa, then that needs to be globalized. Like that education needs to be global. Like that's an acceptable form of education to know that the Garden of Eden is in Africa. right? Like we need to know that Jesus was not blonde hair, blue eyed, and white, like that Michelangelo painted him such, right? So like let's get that kind of education, so that we're speaking the same language. And I think that uncomfortability that you're speaking of, Matt, really just has to do with lack of education. Because once people know, and Lisa, maybe you can attest to this in your own experience, but once you know the truth, you get real comfortable.
Yeah. No, I understand. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Bro.
Yeah. So just got a few points. One, as far as education, we're talking about it starting sort of on an individual basis, and yes, that's important. But our challenge in education is it needs to be institutionalized, or it needs to be a organized method to educate our people. Meaning right now we have public schools, right? And there's a public school curriculum, and our kids are all going to public school, and they're learning an education that is not helpful for them. It basically teaches them how to go out and work for someone else. That's the education system we have, right? Mm-hmm. It teaches them to go out and essentially, be a servant, right, to someone else. So we need an education system that's empowering, but we need a platform to be able to push that out, because relying on individual people to figure this out on their own is not going to happen, especially when you're inundated with the media and you're going to these schools that are not educating you. So that's the first point of education. Then to Matt's point on with regards to the workplace, right? Mike, and I'm in with a question on this, but the reason, from my perspective, this is becoming more important in the workplace, and you see it, for example, in the NBA, where now they're talking about Black Lives Matter, and they're really trying to cater to this. But I think part of the impetus that's driving this is because it's affecting their bottom line. Okay, I mean, it ultimately does affect the bottom line, okay, in terms of profits. And so, in my view, until Black lives starts affecting the money, again, it's just my opinion, until it starts affecting that, then I don't really see a whole lot changing, because really you have to have the mechanism to force change. Just asking for it and begging for it and hoping and pleading and that it's going to change, that's great. Sometimes change happens that way. But we need to have the ability and the power, economic power, to be able to enforce that. And this is something Dr. Claude Anderson talks a lot about, right? In Powernomics. But anyway, I just wanted to leave on that point. And my question to the panel real quick is just, what do you think why should the system change? I mean, what if you are the system, right? Let's say you are the system. Why should you change?
Well, can I be the first one to answer that question, if y'all don't mind? I know it's like quote unquote my show, but I don't want to be rude. You ever hear like when people say things like they don't want me to, or it's like they don't this, or the people or the man, and these different things? I feel like your question is valid, but what system, right? Because depending on who you're talking to, the system is different. And I think that question is hard to answer, right? So and again, we're not a monolith, even in our request for what to be changed, because not every Black person wants everything to change, because some Black people don't want anything to change. They're perfectly fine where they are, right? You see what I'm saying? And so I don't know how easy it is to ask that question. Not because your question, answer that question, not because your question is not valid, but Jasmine will have something say, this is what I want. Or Lisa said, this is what I want. But okay, that's cool. But well, John down the street.
Yeah. Well, the system I'm talking about is, we're talking about systemic racism, right? Systemic racism. I'm talking about that system. What
lives in all systems, right? That's the through line of all systems.
But I still believe that that's a hard one to answer, because how do you identify system? And again, I'm not saying I disagree, but I got to play angel/devil's advocate. Angel advocates, for those people that are watching it, over holy, but I'm just going to devil's advocate. Like where does systemic racism actually exist, right?
Listen, I'm gonna tell you something. If this were easy, we would not be having this conversation.
No,
like we are trying to address 450 years at least, right, of racism. Like, it's not gonna happen overnight. Yes, it's very difficult. And we may not see the kind of utopia that we all dream of, or our aspirational goals, in our lifetime. But can we get a little bit of liberation right here and now? And how do you go about that as your individual self to get that?
Yeah.
Like, focus there. So start with yourself. In what ways are you beholden to power? Analyze that for yourself. Look at all aspects of your life. And in what ways are you beholden to power? Are you beholden to the cash? Are you beholden to your boss? Are you beholden to your parents? Like, who are the power? Who holds the power in your life? And how are you beholden to that?
Yeah.
And then dismantle that. Start there.
Okay, that's a fair perspective, and I appreciate you sharing that. Lisa, you got a thought on that? And I want to pivot to something about the expansiveness, real quick, of Black Lives Matter. But go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, it's such an amazing question, and it's one that is hard to answer for all of the reasons stated. I think, if I were to speak for myself as a white person in the current system, the answer is it doesn't change, right? Like, it shouldn't change because I'm privileged by it, right? So, like, I recognize that, and I recognize how unfair that is. And so my personal journey is, okay, I can walk the walk and talk the talk and have all these, like, I can support the theory of Black Lives Matter, and I can protest and do all this stuff. But, like, when it comes down to it, I'm going to be completely honest with you. When it comes down to it, am I really willing to give up my job so that someone else can take it? And be more diverse and have more of a diverse perspective. And I'm struggling with that because I know that the answer is yes, I should do that, because I know that my students should reflect the diversity of my, of the state of California and all of this stuff. I know that. And I still struggle with it because I'm like, but I've got student loans and blah, blah, blah. So to answer the question, it's hard to answer the question. And I'm going to be completely honest. I'm struggling with that because I know that things need to change, but I'm still benefiting from the power structure that exists. And so it's really hard to come away from that.
I respect that answer, Lisa. I appreciate you saying that. But what makes me cringe and my face was getting all tight is it's the mentality, right? It's the scarcity mentality that we have to address. It's the binary mentality. It's either or. I give up or I take. Like, it's that mentality that we have to start to question. Why am I believing that is the truth?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I had a person who was on a board, and the question was like, we need a Black person on our board. And a white man said, well, I'll give up my seat. Why is that the answer? Right. Do you not have another seat that you can bring into the boardroom? Right? So, like, begin to question your own
assumptions
process.
Well, and
where is that coming from? And who said, who gets to decide?
And I think some of that goes back to, like, I'm bringing this up as an example. We will not go into this rabbit hole. Please, I'm saying this right now. We're not going to this rabbit hole. But when you think about the whole thing that was argued in the debates last week around packing the courts, right? Or something, I think it's like expanding the Supreme Court. I think some of that goes back to their systems that are just put together that people don't know that they can change. So you're right, Jasmine. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at it and saying, who has to give up this? Like, why should you give up the seat? Just make another chair. I think some people need to think, it's almost like the example earlier about, hey, can I stop and say, go to the bathroom? I think someone needs to stand up and say, why not just add another seat, right? So it's just getting used to, I'm not trying to make excuses, but it's the truth, right? No matter what your race is, if you have something that's in place, you don't know if you can go against what's in place, right? So it's just the mentality of, like, what do we do? No matter what your
culture, it's culture. Culture teaches us to be beholden to power, and that we are not allowed to speak up or speak out against people who oppress us or against power, period. It begins at home. It begins with our parents. Like, it's reinforced in every system that we look at.
So I want to pivot. After you, Lisa, I want to pivot to something that's pretty important. But go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Jasmine, I really appreciate you mentioning that. And you're absolutely right. Viewing it from a place of scarcity does no one any favors. And I think that's great. And I would say that I would venture a guess that a lot of non-Black folk like me who are grappling with this sort of thing might be coming from a place of fear because of the scarcity mindset. So I'm just so glad that you brought that up. Thank you.
So I will touch this. If this is important, let's take a step, let's pivot over to something else. Statistics get utilized significantly when it comes to the African American culture, when it comes to anything around fatherless kids, crime within the Black community. I intentionally have stayed away from the terms black on black crime, and I can talk about that in another conversation. When it comes to education that basically warrants higher pay, maybe, or whatever, or just kind of just overall like corporate education, you can kind of say that, right? Skills, trades, etc. And when that stuff happens, what ends up happening is you have within all communities, because I'll admit, I'll stand up and say that I'm one of them that says, yes, Black Lives Matter. And if you notice, one thing I loved about this conversation is majority of this conversation, we did not talk about police brutality almost at all. Not because it's not important, but because that has been the main area of Black Lives Matter. But on the flip side, people are saying very legit things like, what's going on in your community right now? Why are you killing each other, right? There was one story that occurred one weekend where the guy was walking with his daughter in the Bronx, and dude pulls up, puts the gun out, pops him in his head in front of his 4-year-old daughter. He dies. And legitimately so, from all races, the statement was, didn't that man's Black life matter also? And so I think it's important that we talk about that in this conversation. And what do you guys think? I just want to put that out there for discussion around that. All Black lives matter, basically, is what I'm saying.
Well, so let's say this, because it hasn't been clearly stated. All lives will matter when Black lives matter. Okay, let's just be very clear about that. When Black lives are prioritized and centered, and we are taking care of all Black lives, Black trans lives, when we find the support and resources to uplift Black lives in this country so that we are on parity, right? Like it was mentioned earlier that Black people are not earning enough. Well, actually, we're not paid on parity, right? So let's talk about that. When we talk about the breakdown of families, like why is it only acceptable to have heteronormative family structures, right? When we talk about crimes in neighborhoods, why are we not talking about the over-policing in neighborhoods and the under-policing in others?
And so I think that's
we need to have, and holistically, we need to ask, just do a little bit more digging about the perspectives, because we know statistics can be used and manipulated. And that is not to say that, we got stuff in our family we got to fix. And there's stuff in other people's families that's just not talked about.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I don't disagree with you. However, obviously in this conversation, with civil conversations, with this show, with what's out there, the perspectives exist and we have to acknowledge them. We can turn around and say we don't want to acknowledge them, but we have to acknowledge those perspectives. And I don't, again, I'm not sitting here to try to like defend anything besides saying this is what's being said, and it's legit concern by many. What does that look like? So Jasmine, thank you for that. Rob, were you going to say something?
Yeah, sure. No, I think you're right, Matt. That is a legitimate concern. Again, in my thought process, it does go back to the things we've kind of discussed. It does go back to education. It does go back to culture. Again, we have a culture. Whether you want to talk about our music and things like that, our entertainment industry, we have a culture that promotes us to do violence against each other. We have a culture that promotes self-hate. All right, that's just the fact of the matter. And yes, it does have historical roots in oppression and slavery. So that is the root cause. And until we deal with that underlying history, really that's still embedded in us, and as Jasmine talked about, it's still in our bodies, right? Until we deal with that, really, this is going to be a problem. And as far as the statistics, we can go there, but because the problem with statistics is that I hear this is the argument I hear. Okay, I hear that every race, has their own crime, right? Every race, kills their own because just due to proximity, and that's true. But if you look at the per capita statistics, as far as African Americans, we only make up 13% of the population in America. But according to the statistics, we account for over 40% of the murders. And who are we murdering? Mostly our own. Okay, that's just what the statistics say. Folks can choose to believe it or not. But I know from my own experiences, from where I grew up, that's what I was around. Okay. And that's what I experienced. That's what I saw. Okay. But I can't speak for everybody. So I do think it's something we need to address. And there's nothing wrong with saying we need to address that, understanding that the roots of that come from history of oppression and slavery, that we need to deal with the internalization of that.
Yeah, and I think can I announce something? And there's someone making a comment. Ray Sean, thank you for your comments and actually everybody, thank you for commenting on this chat. I want to address something Ray Sean's touching on, which I think is important. And it's a little nuance. What he's touching on is like it's hard to hear going back. And I'm summarizing the snot out of Ray Sean right now, but basically it's hard to continue hearing the rhetoric of here's our music again, and one of the comments he made, which I actually will put up on the screen real quick, is hold on a second. Is basically, it's where to go. Oh, it was basically saying it's like comparing apples and oranges, right? When we're talking about the crime that's happening in the communities versus the crime that's happening against Black Americans. And so I don't necessarily disagree with where he's coming from, because I think that's legit.
Yeah.
I will say that the hard part about it, though, is as frustrating as it is to hear as a Black person that stuff gets thrown back at us as music and everything like that. It is what the non-Black people are easy to see and hear and be able to point to. And also those who are, to Rob's point, grew up in neighborhoods, and I was one of them as well, where you don't see anybody but people of color doing these things. And so I think the term Black Lives Matter, and this goes back to what really is Black Lives Matter, that words, forget about organization, just the words Black Lives Matter has a level of being able to be shifted in any way it can be to fit an intent, like a goal to get something resolved, So I'm not saying, I'm not, and again, I'm not trying to do that, but my point is I'm just giving a perspective to ensure that we are.
Right. Let me say something real quick about that before I lose my thought, because I'm getting old and it's getting late. But when we say Black Lives Matter, it has to be bold. It has to be brilliant. It has to be scary. It has to be, because how else are we going to stop these state-sanctioned genocide? We need to call it what it is. And I don't care if our internal issues of violence against ourselves, that is not a green light for others to murder us, especially the ones that we pay taxes to. And I think we need to be very clear that is not a green light. Well, y'all kill yourselves, therefore we get to kill you. Is that the argument? Is that what we're talking about? No.
I hope not. It's definitely not.
That people who have a sense of humanity, and a sense of humanity and connection of spirit and humanity for themselves, will do the labor that's necessary to understand the issues within their own self first, but then also within their culture and then beyond. And that's all I'm asking. Take care of your stuff, right? So let's move away from this paradigm that embarrassment, guilt, and shame exist. Pretend like they don't even exist. Yeah. There's no such thing as guilt, shame, and embarrassment. And then start to move into atonement, acknowledgement, and taking responsibility. Because all guilt, shame, and embarrassment do, they're old tools, like we could call them the master's tools, as Audre Lorde might call them, that keep us stagnant, stifled, and stuck.
Mm.
Yeah.
They don't do anything for us. They do not serve us. So if we're moving into a new age, we need to get rid of tools that no longer serve us. They don't work.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm embarrassed. Oh, I'm ashamed. Stop.
Yep.
Acknowledge that you made a decision. The decision did not turn out the way that you expected, and it may have caused harm. Acknowledge that you caused harm. Atone for the harm in ways that are appropriate with consent.
Mm-hmm.
And recognize and take responsibility. I'm taking this as a learning, and I won't make the same mistake again.
Right.
Hey Matt, just with regards to Rashad's comment, on the music, I think the reason I bring that up as an example is because most of the music that's put out, we don't own these music companies. Okay.
Speak on it.
Right. I mean, you look at, for example, I am a big I hate BET. Okay, I'm gonna just put it out there. Black Entertainment Television. This is the station, the channel that's developed for Black people. Okay, now they put out anything that's gonna make them money. Okay, that's the bottom line. First of all, again, it all centers around that, right? So they're gonna put out anything that makes money. But you look at the stuff they're putting out, it's all poison. All right, it's all poison. The music they're putting out. Okay, you look at so BET's owned by CBS Viacom. Okay, you look at their board of directors. Okay, there's not a single. The only person of color is their diversity manager, who I think is Latino. I don't know, but there's hardly any people of color on their board of directors. So yes, I am going to speak about BT and the type of music that they put out, the type of stuff that they promote, because we need to think about that. Where is this coming from? Who owns this stuff that we're putting into our minds and affecting what comes out in our actions? We need to be conscious of that. So yes, I'm very passionate, as you can tell, about that.
You don't have, you. It's okay to be passionate. That's the whole point. Just like with Rayshawn, which I appreciate him commenting, is also passionate. And there's people like Tony and Jason and all of us. We're all passionate about this in some form of fashion. And I think that's what's important, is that we're passionate about it, but we're all hopefully trying to attain the same goal, which is why Black Lives Matter has been so polarizing and confusing. And Lisa, I gotta say this, and I'm sorry I'm going to be blunt. As the white person listening to all of this, like, what is going through your mind right now? Like, what's up? I need to hear you.
Yeah. So, well, I loved what Jasmine was saying about shifting the paradigm from feeling guilt, shame, and embarrassment towards one of atonement, acknowledgement, and accountability. I'm looking down because I wrote chicken scratch notes because I think it's a wonderful responsibility. Thank you. Although accountability also kind of works, but yeah. I mean, maybe we can talk about semantics, but yeah, I like that, because I know, as in my own journey, I've been stuck in the place of guilt, shame, and embarrassment. And whenever these kind of topics come up, it's always like kind of a self-deprecating, like flagellation, like, and I got to stop that, because it's not about me. It's about the issues that need fixing. It's about the people of color. It's about like people that aren't me that are being oppressed. So I want to say that I really like that.
Thank you, say that it is about you, because it is about your liberation too. Because if we believe that our liberation is tied, then I need you to be free so I can be free, and you need me to be free so you can be free. So when we get to the core of our humanity, that's where it exists.
I appreciate that. I need to, like we said earlier, I need to unlearn like the ways that I have been beholden to the power of oppression and things like that. So thank you for again pointing that out. In terms of the BET Black culture stuff, I'm not sure that I know enough to be able to add to that part of the conversation, but it seems to me that yeah, I don't have anything on that one.
No, I just outside looking in, just wanted your perspective, because the thing about it is, and again, Jasmine, you, Rob, Rayshawn, all the people that are commenting have legitimate perspectives that we don't want to dismiss. And even when I brought up the points I was bringing up, these are all real people's perspectives about this. And do we quickly just dismiss it because we don't agree with it? Because the thing about it is, they're also some of the same people who we work with every day, we live next to, we go to the same grocery store with, that in some form or fashion, again, not saying we're not going to convince everyone, but when we're saying Black Lives Matter, or if we're saying Black Lives Matter, or if we're saying all Black Lives Matter, like, it needs to resonate. And when you have certain aspects that become easily offensive for whatever reason, because now, I'll be honest with you, I'll just tell you one thing that's really, I'm going to make a statement that's going to be controversial, but hey, it is what it is. I find that the organization of BLM, because of the way the media rhetoric has been around it and everyone's been negative towards it, has given a reason to some people to say, I do not support Black Lives Matter. And that makes it very hard and more difficult than when before the organization started taking more light. That's not blaming the organization, by the way, I'm not. Because everyone's response to it is what I'm really more focused on, not what they're doing. So if somebody says, I'm doing XYZ, their excuse is, I don't want to be aligned to that, I'm good. And it's like, whoa, okay, so now where do we go from here? Y'all feel what I'm saying? Like, again, I'm not saying it's right. but it is. It's what's happening. You know, somebody made a comment earlier, and I'm going to put it up on the screen. Her name was Molly, where she was, you know, she was just basically saying, like, you know, she felt like some of the white people in her life have now used the organization as a reason not to support Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. Because if it's a threat and you living with a scarcity mentality, you're going to grab the lowest hanging fruit that's available and twist it so that you remain centered. So I'm not, like I shared earlier.
Sorry, I went a little slow there, but I think I got what you're saying now.
Yeah. Do I need to, I could say it a different way. I mean, so like I said earlier, like the phrase Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter is used to neutralize Black Lives Matter and to recenter whiteness. Like you're talking about yourself. No. All lives matter. My life matters, right? Like as if I were a white person. That's what it works to do. And so when there are her white friends or coworkers are saying, well, I don't believe in that, like all lives matter. What they're doing is not acknowledging her Black life. They're not acknowledging her Black life. They're not acknowledging her Black experience. And it's a form of erasure, neutrality and erasure.
Lisa, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely onto something there. It seems to me that like the necessary precursor step to all of this is understanding that the lived experiences of Black people in this country are fundamentally different than the lived experiences of white people in this country. And there are people in my circles, some of them that I really love, that struggle with adhering to Black Lives Matter as a movement because of those distractions, right? The propaganda and everything that's going on around, you know, that. And so in my own kind of interactions, I've tried to just shift away from the movement altogether and focus on, okay, let's talk about privilege, but let me not use that word. let me see how we can kind of talk about how these experiences are different from each other. And that, to me, in my perspective, has to happen before they can then see that there are differences in the way that people are living and see how those differences can lead to deaths of unarmed Black people. So that's, yeah.
I know, and some people are so, you know, thanks for sharing that. I will say, I don't, again, just speaking for myself, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to stay away from the words in order to still get the message across. I know that there is an affinity to the words Black Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter, and there's nothing wrong with that either. However, we have to, and I think it was you, Jasmine, study social sciences, something like that. Like, and again, I don't know if this falls in line with that, but we also need to know that when that statement is made, especially now more than 2 or 3 years ago, because it's now embedded in corporate America, the walls come up. Just like that, boom, the walls come up. Huh?
Good. I want them up.
And that's okay.
That means that you're paying attention.
Yeah, but that's okay for someone in your position. Okay with being able to have the walls come up because you're okay with that level of comfortability. But then there's some people who are like where Lisa's coming from, where she's saying they need to be educated on why the statement even exists. So I'm not even going to use the statement and let me just educate them. There's nothing wrong with that either, because it's almost like I don't say a reverse way of doing it, but it's just, you know, it's just hard because now what happens is they have now combined the two. And now what happens, you see this on right in I would say, I'm going to say more on the right side media, but in general, something happens, it's immediately said, BLM Antifa, glass broke. BLM Antifa, cop hit. BLM Antifa. And so as much as this is annoying to those who support Black Lives Matter, we have to realize that the media
psychological priming. It's just psychological priming.
And so that's why I keep saying, what really is Black Lives Matter? Because if we or those who are pro Black Lives Matter don't take that in consideration, that the media is now flipped it, we can end up continuing, again, I just think so, continuing to, not us, but the people's response will continue to put walls up and make it more difficult to want to. It sucks. I'm not saying it's right, but the statement Black Lives Matter is not always the organization Black Lives Matter, and the media is now saying BLM is causing all this violence. So it's like,
well, listen,
about that.
that graphic of that inverse triangle of the conspiracy theory. If y'all Google the conspiracy, I think it's called the conspiracy triangle. I don't know, Matt, if you have that available, but we're talking about how are we detaching from reality when we start talking about Antifa.
You see it now?
When we start making Antifa a bad name, when has it been in recent history, since World War II? Because we fought in World War II against fascists, right? And now we're saying that it's a bad thing to be against fascism? Like, how are we not connecting that is revolting, that is dehumanizing, and it's completely detached from reality?
Yeah.
That you can imbibe that as if it were true that Antifa is bad. Are you listening?
Right.
Understand? Is it penetrating at all that you're saying Antifa, whoever Antifa is, first of all, right? That's unfounded and detached. But to say that you're anti-fascist is a bad thing, since when?
So
Right.
I just want to comment on that real quick, if I could. You know, it seems to be what happens is you talk about fascism, and we're fighting against fascism. What happens is the other side, you know, the opposing side will say, well, you guys are the fascists. You know, BLM is the fascist. You know, and that's just it's name calling, right? But what Matt was speaking about earlier, right? Initially, after the death of the murder of George Floyd, you know, Black Lives Matter, the movement seemed to be picking up quite a bit of ground, right? And it seemed to be more favorable looked upon in the public image, right? Because they're like, wow, this, you know, this, they saw it, right? Everybody saw the video. Since that time, it seems like people are getting tired of hearing about it, right? And they're becoming numb to it. They're like, I'm tired of hearing about it, right? And that's why I keep speaking about, you know, we need to have something actionable. So, for example, you know, a better hashtag, not that this is more than a hashtag, but it's something I think is more powerful, is to arrest the police officers who killed Breonna Taylor, right? That's actionable. And that is much more powerful than just, you know, Black Lives Matters is good, right? It's powerful, but I'm saying that,
Well,
you know,
I don't know if we need to get into
right?
superlatives of what's better and what's not. I think both and. I carry that
No,
with
I'm
me.
just saying it might be more effective. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying our message, if we're trying to affect change, I'm just saying it may be more effective, right? I'm not knocking anything. I think we need to have, you know, whatever we can, right? I'm not, you know, not supporting that. I'm just saying that may be more effective and communicate what we're trying to say more effectively. That's all.
I get a little sensitive because it was created by my sisters, and I believe in letting Black women have their say, and that Black Lives Matter as its own stands alone, because we wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for that phrase. And so I think it's important, just as important as saying arrest the cops who murdered Breonna Taylor, arrest Daniel Cameron, arrest the president, right? Like all of those, it's like both and. It's like both.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that it's either or. I'm just saying that, you know, the reason a lot of people are moving away from the movement is because they can't see an end. They can't see an end, right? And so they're like, you know, I'm tired of hearing about this. I mean, that's not my attitude. I'm just saying that's the sentiment for a lot of people. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and I want to say to your point,
and it won't stop, right? It won't stop the movement just because they're tired. It's not going to stop the movement.
Well, it may slow it down. So, and that's a problem too.
Well, movement cycle. If you study movement labs, you know, they talk about what the movement cycle looks like, and there is a period of call it de-escalation, right, where the movement is heightened by incident. Everyone's on board. The collective movement happens. The global protests happen, and then you go down into the cycle. It's just the natural cycle of movements.
Yeah, but we got to end the cycle. We got to end the cycle. At some point, we need to know, you know, we need a goal. We need an end state where Black lives do matter in America. That's what I'm trying to get to. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go through lifetimes of cycles, right? Because this will be generations, right? Mm-hmm. You know,
yeah. So
what it looks like.
Well,
yeah,
I think
I guess you need to look at like what is your expectation for yourself in your life.
Well, I was going to touch that for a bit too, and then Lisa, I'm going to let you speak because you look like you have something. I think it's everybody has different goals and intentions. I will say that policies, and again, I consider myself the dumbest one between the four of us, but policies, laws, and all that stuff eventually do change behavior, right? And you're talking about just under 60 years of us having all of our rights. Really, when you think about it, max about 50, 52 years having all of our rights in the United States of America as African Americans. And it's just going to take time because people are still alive from that time. Laws take a while to become habit unless they're immediate laws like paying taxes, right? For example. And so I think we're going to see some change, and whatever laws get written today because of the BLM movement, or whatever impacts, let's say, I'm going to use administrations for the purposes of who they are, right? So Barack Obama was the president under his administration when BLM started, and now Trump is the president under his administration. Whatever these guys are doing on paper, forget about what's in the media, I think it's important, what they're doing on paper will eventually be part of what you're talking about, Rob, as what may be like an outcome of change, but we don't know yet. And it's going to take a while to change behavior. And I think that's where movements, to Jasmine's point, is where it just continues to go until it's really, truly felt. But you're right, Rob. I think there is a little bit of exhaustion right now. And the media is intentionally exhausting it. And unfortunately, Jasmine, for the women who created this name, which I think they've done what they can, and what they did is nothing wrong with that. It does put a negative light on them, unfortunately. Not saying people want it to be, you know, or I'm sure people do want it to be. But my point is like, that is something that they're facing. So Lisa, can you say something else? I want to kind of close out a bit, but go ahead, Lisa.
I think it depends on the perspective that we're talking about, because I don't find what they're doing is negative at all.
Of course not. You don't, but a lot of people do, and that's what my point I'm trying to bring up is that you don't see what they're doing as negative, but somebody does, and that's the unfortunate balance of just the way things are, right? Some people listen to me today and didn't like a thing I said. Somebody listened to me and absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna happen. So
yeah,
like,
Lisa,
that's what the culture does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything really big to say. I really understand and appreciate Rob's point, because I do feel that small actionable wins by the movement will gain momentum and like diffuse the fatigue that some non-Black folks have with it. And I think that it would be a really great way to capitalize and help move the movement forward if we could get these smaller actionable wins that move the needle in general.
Yeah, so it's like the question is like, what do you see as your work? Like, what do you see as your work contributing to a small win? How do your values align, if they align with Black Lives Matter, with humanity, with, you know, decreasing violence against people of color, getting kids out of cages? Like, pick a lane, pick an issue, and work that, and work on it. Like, that can be your action. There's so much that we can. Climate injustice, right? Like, we didn't even touch on that in this conversation. There's so many. Healthcare. Pick a system. Education. Pick a system.
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
That's how you.
That's not a problem.
Yeah, and then decide how you want to roll. How do you want to take action to create the change that you want to see?
Yeah, I'm in progress.
That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. So just as we sort of wrap up, is there anything that I want to give you guys an opportunity, 30 seconds, to, if you want to talk about Black Lives Matter from your perspective or this conversation, what is it that you would want people to leave this conversation, listen to this conversation from your perspective? What is it? And I'm going to go by ladies first model. If you don't mind, I'm going to go Jasmine, Lisa, and Rob.
I do mine. I'm not going first.
Oh, okay, cool. Anybody else?
Rob can go.
All right. Yeah. So for me, the only thing I would want to leave folks with is we have to change our culture. Okay. We have to change the culture, and that's internal to us. And so we, you know, my focus is on us building each other up. Right. There are things that I'm doing, right, to sort of, you know, personally that, you know, towards that effort. Jasmine's right. It does start with us, but each of us needs to take that action to help those around us. Right. So I really encourage you guys in whatever way you can, to lift each other up and really do that. So that's really my message for those, who are listening. We do have to change the culture and define who we are as a people, but it starts with us as individuals. So, that's really all I have.
Great, thanks, Rob. Jasmine, Lisa?
I can jump in so that Jasmine can have the last one. I just want to address or mention from my perspective as a white person that, some of the hardest things for me in this space and in this work is getting comfortable with being wrong and getting comfortable with being insensitive, and not to say that is gives permission to continue to do that, but to be called on my errors and to learn from them and to grow and to hear and understand that my intention does not often equal the impact that it has on people. And so, I don't want to sound condescending or patronizing in any way, but for me in my own space, it's been really hard for me to come to terms with that. But now that I know that it's okay to be wrong, and it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and that's all part of the process. So if there are folks out there on this call that are kind of feeling in this space, then I just wanted to give you permission to be there with me and to know that it's okay to be learning.
No, thank you for saying that, Lisa. I appreciate that. And Jasmine?
Yeah. I would just offer that, to put in perspective, I am one of the first people in my family that was born into a system in which discrimination was codified as illegal. So anyone born after 1965, that was the last of the discrimination laws that were codified, such that, I would have right to take someone to a court and defend myself, and that there would be actionable punishment, upon someone who decided to discriminate me based on my race, gender, religion, and so forth. So being the first generation to experience or be born into that new system, it's still new. It's generations and generations before us that were not brought into that system, were not born into that system. And that is a system of privilege, of relative privilege, right? And so when we think about timelines, when we think about expectations for how long this is going to take, like, movements only move at the speed of trust. And it's not until we really work on ourselves. And I go back to self-care. My sister, Anana Harris Paris, wrote the book, Self-Care Matters, A Revolutionary's Approach. It really, change starts within. Rob said it. Change starts within. We have to get ourselves right as individuals, take responsibility for our own personal traumas, or, whatever our experiences is as adults. Get a therapist. Go work out, do what you need to do for yourself to take care of yourself. And like my mama said, do what's best for you and help somebody else along the way, like Rob said. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's huge. I appreciate that. Rob, will you respond to that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't mean to talk out of turn. I know we made our last comments, but it's important that we do self-examine, because most of us are probably listening to this thinking, well, that doesn't apply to me. I don't have any sort of trauma or residual issues. The same
stuff, man.
If you're human,
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, we all have issues, and I think we need to really delve inside and examine. Okay, do you have residual issues from oppression and slavery and sort of this post-traumatic experience, and it may be playing out in your life, right? There may be a cycle in your life, so you just you have to sort of be humble and say, okay, maybe this is something I need to deal with, okay, that I may not be aware of. So that's something I think, our community, we need to really self-examine and look at. And obviously there's actions for other ethnicities and races too, I think also need to self-examine, right? We as a nation need to self-examine. So that's it, Matt. Thanks.
And learn about a power analysis. Go Google the heck out of what is a power analysis and hierarchy, and look at yourself in relation to that, and how do you uphold systems of oppression.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Lisa, you have any more retorts before I quote my closing statement?
I'm good. Thanks, everyone.
All right. So First off, I want to thank Jasmine, Lisa, and Rob for this conversation. Black Lives Matter. What really is Black Lives Matter? It is not an easy question to answer, as you can tell based on the panel and the conversation we had tonight. But I do think we just rose to light the confusion, which is what I was looking for around Black Lives Matter, the importance around Black Lives Matter, and the perspectives that people have about Black Lives Matter. And I think it's important for those who are listening, those who are my guests as well, to be able to hopefully walk away from this, to have conversations in your own circles, those who are doing it professionally on a regular day-to-day basis, like I know Jasmine's doing, Lisa and Robert doing somewhat in their lives. Or for those that don't do it professionally in their lives, and this is just a regular everyday thing, but you want to be able to try to contribute to Black Lives Mattering. Um, the thing I want everyone to be able to walk away with is that no one has the right answer at all. But when we try to take away from somebody's pain, whoever that those individuals are, in this case, we're talking about African Americans, Blacks, it makes it very difficult for those that are going through that pain to feel like they want to keep fighting, no matter who it is. So please take the time, get educated, self-examine yourself. If you're white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, whatever you are, and so that way we can move the conversation forward in our own lives and in our own actions, because we definitely want all lives to matter. To Jasmine's point, all lives matter when Black lives matter, but we also know that this has been very difficult for a lot of people in today's time. And I just hope that you all have enjoyed this conversation. Again, thanks again for those who joined online and commented, the civil commenters. I appreciate you. Panel, please hold on, and I'm ending the live right now. Thank everybody.